Got loud there, didn't it? Hot mic. Thanks for being here this evening, everybody. I know it's a great use of time, and we're very excited to have everyone again and talk education. Just a couple quick intro things, and then Dr. Register wanted to have the floor for a little bit and make a brief announcement. This is our third to the last meeting. We have scheduled 2 meetings in February, the 4th and then the 18th. Same time and place, 5:30 p.m. here. So right now that's the plan. There has been some expressed maybe wanting to continuation of dialogue after we come out of hopefully having recommendations in our last meeting. And so our thought was we're going to come up with something for that, and we've been talking about possibly PAC meetings that are already established, some groups that are already established in the area. But as of this task force, our goal is that the 18th is our last meeting. We've got some pretty good recommendations to come out of that. This meeting, obviously, we're going to talk about the pathways again. It's our follow-up from 2 meetings ago. We've got Chris Weber here to present tonight, and he has an actual proposal based on all of our feedback from the first pathways discussion that's in front of you. So that's kind of the next steps and where we are right now. Again, 2 more meetings in February where we'll continue turnaround discussions and finalize our pathways discussion and have some recommendations to take to the community. Then would be the next step at that point. So the broader community. Do you want to say anything or turn it over to?
I think we're
good. Okay. Yeah, we'll turn it over to Dr. Register then, and you had a couple of announcements.
Thank you very much. It's good to see all of you here. We have made some public announcements today that concern leadership in our priority schools. A number of appointments have been made, which is a departure from the normal procedure that I think will serve us very well going into next year. We're announcing the appointments of principals for next year at our priority schools. We've got a couple of schools that are still not appointed, but the great majority of the leadership changes or keeping leadership in place is announced today, and for purposes of the East Nashville group, we have named a new principal today for Englewood Elementary, Dr. Tracy McPherson, who will be taking over for next year, but will be relocating this year, and I think that's very important for a couple of reasons. One is Englewood is a school that will receive a new SIG grant, a new school improvement grant, and we want Dr. McPherson to come on and begin working with the faculty to plan that school improvement grant, the use of those funds. This is going to be school-based and community-based planning. Of course, we'll have some oversight in that at the central office, but we want to appoint the leadership so that and have them get engaged with the faculties in these schools and do outreach into the community, which is a requirement of the SIG planning grant process. We hope to have those plans completed by the end of this school year, and so that we can begin using the funds as we go forward. The priority schools have are in different places in terms of what's required of leadership and teachers and so forth. And Englewood is one that is new to the priority list, and also is new to the SIG grant process. A requirement of receiving SIG grants, which are significant funds. We're talking a good bit of money over the next 3 years going into these schools, is that leadership has to change if it hasn't recently just been changed. And the principal at Englewood has been there, this is beginning her 4th year. And so it is a requirement that we change leadership there to qualify for the grant funds for this school. And Ms. Mickle's done a nice job. You know, we've talked about plans for the schools and everything, and the fact that or success, the scores haven't gone up yet, but frankly, we haven't had what I consider enough time to really see the impact of that. We've got 3 years worth of test data, but they've only been, we've only been in this process for 2 years now. But setting that aside, we still have to, if we're going to access funds, we still have to make a change there. So we'll be working with her to find an appropriate placement in another school for her. Dr. McPherson is one of the turnaround school leaders that we've sought nationally. We have a very rigorous process, interview process and selection process. We started out with 65 applicants for these positions, and so far we've identified 4, and she is one of the 4, and performed at very high levels. She actually, we're not hiring new principals for these jobs. We're hiring people that have proven success. And she has been very successful as a principal, and actually a few years ago worked in this district as a curriculum leader, instructional leader, and we're very fortunate to get her back. She's in Montgomery, Clarksville now. We met with the faculty today. And we're meeting with all the faculties where we have new leadership today, and we're going to try to get around to all the schools as soon as we can. But met with the faculty today and had some conversations about her coming on board, and also how her proposed interaction with the faculty in the planning process. I thought it was a good meeting today. I'll move on to other schools in this area. You've got a copy of the press release, but I want to highlight a couple here, and let me congratulate Principal Miriam Harrington for being selected to continue her leadership role at Jerry Baxter. Miriam's only been at Jerry Baxter. This is our first year there, and we're already seeing change. We know that, and we're very excited about what can happen there. And she passes. She made the grade. She's one of those competitive people that qualifies to be at Jerry Baxter, and we're looking forward to the work there. Now, let me stop and say that I should have done this earlier, but I invited for the next part of the conversation 3 high school principals to be here particularly when we start talking about pathways, and I would like to introduce them. Dr. Ron Woodard, Maplewood High School principal; Steve Ball, East principal; and Michael Steele, Stratford High School principal. And they're very important when we start talking about K-12 pathways, and I would encourage them to join in the conversation when it comes time to do that. But Miriam will be continuing at Jerry Baxter, and it is also one of those schools that qualifies now for a new school improvement grant, and so that process will begin immediately, and working with Miriam and the faculty there and the community to develop plans for that. Bailey STEM Magnet, Dr. Christian Sawyer will remain at least through the end of the year. And Julie, I think Julie, I won't put words in Julie's mouth, but Bailey's one that is making some really good progress. It's an uphill climb there, but it's only had 2 years. Dr. Sawyer's only been there a short period of time. They don't have their 3rd year of data yet, And so we want to wait and see what the data looks like at the end of this year, what kind of progress they're making. We've seen some very favorable signs there, and we'll look forward to seeing what happens at the end of this year, and then make decisions about future leadership there. Now, what have I left out in East Nashville? Kirkpatrick, Dr. Nelson, Mildred Nelson, will continue at Kirkpatrick through the transition to the KIPP school. She is Mildred's a good leader, and she's really made the beginning of that transition process work very well for Kirkpatrick. I think we'll see a good partnership there, and we'll see opportunities for children to develop at Kirkpatrick or at alternatives that we have to offer. We've got the other announcements are here that you can see, and I'll stop at that. May I entertain any questions, any comments?
Yeah, we set aside a few moments if folks do want to ask Dr. Register about this announcement or even any other thing before we launch the pathways. So, Jackson.
It sounded like you feel pretty confident that Inglewood will get the school improvement grant.
Yes. It's not a competitive grant. You just have to have a quality grant. And so what happened? The schools that qualify for the planning grants will get the school improvement grants if they have a good plan. It has to be approved by the state. And so, and one of the criteria is leadership, is where leadership is, and it's also quality of teachers. An expectation in all of our priority schools is that we not have any teachers that are performing at the grade 1 or grade 2 level. The low-performing teachers. So it's an expectation, and frankly, it's my expectation that teachers that are low-performing teachers will have to leave these schools.
And my recollection of the state law says that in order to get the school improvement grant, one of the options on the table is that you change leadership. And I think it also said in 50% of the teachers. Is that applicable here, or you don't have to do that?
No. What we have to do is change level 1 and 2.
Okay.
Level 1 and 2 teachers.
Great.
Or justify, we have to justify the faculty. So if we have high performing teachers, now Inglewood's a good example of a school that's got some teachers that are performing at the 4 and 5 level, and we do not want to change those teachers, and we don't have to.
Is that their overall team evaluation score, or is that their...
Overall.
John had a question.
So, looking at the list of priority schools, so there are 4: Buena Vista, Napier, Robert Churchwell, and Bailey, where the SIG grants are expiring, right?
Yes.
So, I understand that one of the financial drivers we're going to use for these turnaround plans is SIG funding for the schools that don't already have it. So I guess I have sort of two sides of the same question. I know it says on here that sustainability is going to be built into the budget process for those schools where SIG funding is expiring. So I guess question is, what does that mean? And then for the schools that are going to get SIG grants, those are 3 years, right? What's the plan for, all right, after our 3 years are up, it's kind of like the race to the top dollars, we had them for a couple of years and then they're gone. What's the long-term plan there?
The long-term plan for soft money for grants is to keep those practices that are working and are successful. And so the first place we look is to the operating budget or to other federal programs that may continue on. These schools are all Title I schools, and so conceivably at the end of 3 years we could use Title I funds to pick up those practices that are working, or we could include in our local budget preparation funding to continue to support the grants after they're gone. For the schools that are losing their grants this year, there are a couple of things going on. One big change that we're considering district-wide this year is a weighted student funding formula. That's really important for the schools that serve high percentages of economically disadvantaged children, high percentages of English learners, high percentages of children with special needs, and so that weighted student funding formula will push more funds into some schools, and that'll happen at some of the schools that'll be losing their funding at the end of this year. We have also we're looking at the wraparound service money. It's a question asked at Inglewood this afternoon about community schools, and we'll be looking at budget requests that address providing wraparound services, and also looking inside our own budget at funds that can be redirected to support programs like that. So, and I'll say that over the past few years we've been very well supported by Metro Council and Mayor Dean. They deserve a lot of credit for making education a priority. So, we hope we'll hear a sympathetic ear when we start talking about funds for next year.
Brief follow-up, maybe. So, part of the reason I ask is that I understand that the district is operating with scarce resources, and we're going to use the dollars that we can get. We're going to apply the federal dollars. We're going to get local stuff. We're going to get state stuff. We're going to put it together. What I wonder is that there's some danger there in if you've got so many different revenue streams, this one's drying up and this one's coming online and this one's redirected here and this one goes here, it can start to get a little tangled, and it can start to feel like there's the possibility that some of that stuff gets redirected into things that aren't particularly valuable. So I guess my question is, has there been any discussion of having just a real sort of dedicated turnaround fund, as a part of the budget? You go to the council and say, hey, we need 10 million or we need 15 million to set aside because we know we have some grant money, but some of it's expiring 3 years from now. We know these grants are going to go away. I mean, really isolating the funding for that so it doesn't get picked away on other things.
We haven't been that explicit with it. However, we had a board meeting last night, and we talked about in a work session and talked about the budgeting process. We have some funds now that are dedicated for previous turnaround strategies, and those will be discussed, like enhanced option money, funds to support enhanced options and other programs like that. There is we will extensively discuss this in the budget talks this year. I don't know that we'll identify a set program for that, but rather to look at programs and services that we want to provide, and the big one is the weighted student funding formula. That's really important to make sure, and then programs like the community schools program. We've got about a month's worth of work administratively before we bring a final recommendation to the board, and a lot of engagement, a lot of conversation between now and then to look at different ways to fund. We're pretty successful with grant money. We also have a big budget. Our budget's almost $750 million a year, and we've balanced that pretty well. Race to the Top money's gone. We started a lot of initiatives then, and we haven't run off a cliff yet. We plan, anytime we start a new initiative, we plan an exit strategy, we plan a sustainability strategy. And I wouldn't expect that to be a problem as we go forward.
Yeah, I think we will. We'll lend a good ear to it, and I think the communities and schools, and very interested in the weighted student funding, so look forward to seeing some stuff on that.
I was just going to add, from inside the schools, when you're starting a turnaround process, it takes more personnel because you've got kids that don't have that solid foundation, but if you can get the personnel in there and get that in-your-face teaching and get them up where they need to be, then they have that solid foundation. Our lower grades are needing much less support than our upper grades. So after you have those 3 years of extra resources, you can pull back from it a little bit because you've got that solid foundation for your kids.
I have a question. Is there a possibility, I know in the SIG grant, in the requirements that leadership has to change, because some of the administrators or leaders of other schools, especially in the bottom 25, have talked about needing additional leadership, additional personnel in the building. Could those particular leaders who may have to move, or because it's part of the SIG grant requirement, could they be relocated into an area where they may be used as a, additional secondary leadership or lead person in a...
It's a possibility. That's certainly one thing we'll look at.
Yeah, do you have something?
This is a general question you might be able to answer. What did the pool of applicants for the turnaround principals, how large of a percentage or ballpark minority applicants were there? Minority, including men, as a minority.
I don't know the percentage of the total 65, and of course that's a growing number too.
Right.
Alan, do you?
I don't know the number. We should be able to provide that easily.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Register. Appreciate the comments.
So let me make one other point about this that I think is really important for Englewood. We've got teachers that are working hard there, and we're bringing in a new leader. And we've got Jill Peoples over there. We need to start recruiting kids to Englewood, and we need to. One of the things that we need to do. Our new principal will be coming into town, and Carrie Mickle will remain through the end of the year. But we can start recruiting kids to Englewood before the end of the year. Same thing for Jerry Baxter. And one of the great cheerleaders for Jerry Baxter, and one of the great of the assists, is Dr. Ron Woodard back there, who's was over. Is he bothering you? No. Okay. But there is such an advantage. There is such an advantage to doing this in 2 steps and to bringing leadership on now and advertising those. And particularly when there are people who I think can really make a difference. So we need to talk to you about future engagement at Englewood. And that leads into the pathways discussion. And I hope we can come together with some really cool ideas here. I want to thank y'all for your input last time, and you can see a little bit of where Chris has worked this tonight. I'm pretty excited about it. I think there's some real possibilities here.
I will say the community is definitely embracing Englewood Elementary as that being the main part of my district, and we're fired up. I mean, we're fired up about the opportunity. We know we're not performing. We're excited. That's great about a new leadership, national search, all great things to hear. So we've got a job to do in the community. We need to connect Tracy Bruno better a little bit too. We've talked about that as well in these groups, and so we're gonna work hard on it. Thank you again, and thanks to our principals for being here. I guess I'll let Chris kind of take off and present what you've come up with based on our comments from the previous meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to pull over a flow chart and talk off of a board. All of you have the flow chart in front of you. I don't know how I messed up that chart. Let's go grab this board right now. So when we were here in earlier December, the group, I thought, did an excellent job of doing brainstorming on the pathway conversations and the programs. we listened to what you said. There was a lot of good ideas that came out of that. And so this is the flow chart. This is the current flow chart. So this is what you saw last time. And I've got an updated version here that says draft. Okay, I'll speak in the mic. So all of you have the draft version in front of you, and I think there's extras if anybody doesn't have one in the crowd. The one thing I want to make clear up front is that this is us responding to what we heard from the committee, from the advisory group, and this is a draft scenario. So there's a narrative write-up that goes with it that says draft across it. So I know we have media here tonight, so there's media coverage, and I know that many of you will go talk to your constituents, which is great. But I want to make very clear to everybody, this is very tentative. We're still in the planning stages. We're coming to you tonight to simply talk this out, get additional feedback so we can move forward. I just don't want anybody, jumping the gun thinking this is some approved plan that's already on its way. But I appreciate all the input. So with this, I'll start working from left to right, beginning with the Maplewood cluster. There's not a lot of significant changes in the Maplewood cluster. However, right at Maplewood High School, we highlighted the need for K-12 program alignment. And that really goes all the way through K through 12 in the whole cluster. I guess before I get started too, I believe you also received a typed up version of the notes from your last meeting as well. And so as I go through this, I'm going to speak to some of the other suggestions that were mentioned that may not appear here. And so this is just simply our first attempt at kind of pulling it all together from what we heard. In Maplewood, it was clear that there's need for alignment amongst the programs for marketing and various other purposes, and so that's what we're highlighting. There was also discussion about possible tier configurations going K-5 or other things of that nature. However, in this scenario you're looking at, it remains K-4 and 5A. So all of those things can still continue to be discussed. There is a lot of available capacity within the elementaries and middle schools, and so there's room to do that. However, if you look at changing tier configurations, it makes it you have to really think hard about how you use your middle schools. And so we left it K-4, 5A, but we know that there needs to be additional conversation about that. As you go over to the Stratford cluster, this is where you see more significant changes from what we heard from you. At the very top, Stratford would go to serve grades 5 through 12. And so what that is essentially reflecting is relocating the current Bailey STEM middle school program to be combined at the STEM high school program at Stratford. So many of you are familiar with the renovation efforts at Stratford. Some of those are complete and some are still underway. But Stratford is a good building and is even going to get even better throughout the remaining renovations. And there's a lot of benefits to this that you all talked about. I'm going to stay just to the left-hand side and work my way down through Litton's feeders. So Litton would remain 5 through 8. It's on an upward track both academically and also marketing or recruiting reasons. And then it's a STEM program that's already feeding into Stratford. Dan Mills remains STEM, still feed into Litton. And then Inglewood would remain also K through 4, still feeding into Litton. But what we highlight there is the need to add some kind of STEM or STEAM program. So that's what we heard mentioned from the parent groups. And so there needs to be continued dialogue with both school leadership, with this committee about narrowing that program and aligning that program with both Litton and Stratford. As we work further to the right, you see I've highlighted in dark green STEM Middle Academy at Stratford. There's really no name for it, but that's where Bailey would have previously been. And so you see straight below that is Rosebank. So Rosebank in this scenario is written up as K4. There was talks in your notes about possibly making Rosebank K5 or K6 or other configurations. And where that gets challenging is just when you think about one-off tier levels where they would feed. So this is kind of a baseline scenario, keeping it K4, but we do recommend adding the STEM program and that it would continue to feed directly into the 5th grade with Bailey being at Stratford. Going further to the right, you see Kirkpatrick in red, and so Kirkpatrick has already been named as the KIPP Charter Conversion School, and so that's underway. You see two arrows feeding out of that. So once that KIPP conversion continues, those students would feed into, they would have the option to continue through the KIPP program at KIPP Middle School. But that program isn't a zoned middle school as Kirkpatrick is, and so it would also have the option as the zoned middle school feeder would continue into the Stratford, into the academy at Stratford. Continuing further to the right is where we pick up back at the top and we start with East Padea. And so East currently has both the middle and high school on the same campus. And one of the suggestions that was brought up is moving the middle school campus to Bailey, which is a larger building, so it would allow us to expand the capacity and the area to serve and the ability to serve students that are looking for that program. And so you see East Middle School there in the Bailey campus, and then you see Warner then below it. So Warner is currently a feeder into Bailey. This would then implement the actual Padea program at Warner, give Warner a guaranteed pathway into East Middle School because now you've expanded the capacity of that middle school to take additional feeders. And so it would have a direct feeder for Padea pathway into East. However, again, because East is not a zone school as Warner is, the zone pathway would continue back to Stratford if students wanted to go that direction as well. Lockland is the existing K-4 pathway into East currently, and this shows that as remaining in place. And it also mentions below that the need to just evaluate existing Padea programs across the district. If we overall expand the capacity of the East Padea program, evaluating existing Padea programs that we may want to consider as a feeder into East. To the right, you see the KIPP Middle School. That's just that feeder coming over from Kirkpatrick, and you have the KIPP charter pathway, the Republic and the charter school pathways. Those are essentially unchanged from the previous version that you saw. With that, I would be happy to open it up for questions.
I'd love to get some dialogue going, and yeah.
So I noticed that with the STEM Middle Academy at Stratford, it says that there's going to be a change of enrollment at Stratford to add 250. So that's a lower enrollment than Bailey currently has. So where does that number come from?
Well, very good question, and thank you for asking because I failed to clarify it on the front end. There are some kind of estimated enrollments on here. I want to be really clear. These are very preliminary. We haven't thoroughly done projections and analysis on this. So this is just knowing that that Warner could feed out. Mm-hmm. It's also taking into account that KIPP conversion. We do expect for a lot of students to continue from Kirkpatrick's KIPP program over. So that's looking at once that's fully implemented, that many of those students would likely follow the KIPP charter school. And so that's ultimately the 250 estimate. But I want to be real clear. Even when you look at the capacity, Bailey's capacity is 700 as compared to currently East's enrollment is closer to 475 with like 485. But so in theory, you could put like an extra 200 students at the Bailey site. These are very preliminary looks at these buildings, and so if we put enrollment projections up here, they're extremely tentative.
So one thing, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one thing that's a really important component to these K-12 pathways are guarantees. One thing that Chris has looked very carefully at, and when Steve's back here, I actually had a talk to Steve this afternoon before I came over here about this, but when we increase the capacity, what it does is if you have elementary schools that feed into a middle high school program all across here, you've got the capacity to let everybody go who wants to. And that's important because right now we have elementary pathways that are, and people that feel like they're blocked at the end of elementary school. We heard that a lot, maybe not so much in here, but we heard it a lot in the community meetings that we held in the schools. And this because we can do this in East, this is one of the things that I talked about earlier. We've got some alternatives in the East cluster because we're not overcrowded anywhere. If we reconfigure, we can guarantee some things here that we might not can do in other places, like a K-12 Paideia pathway and we're looking, we're talking about 4 elementary schools. We've got 2 other elementary schools that are Paideia schools, and we could guarantee that pipeline all the way through when we increase the capacity at East, which is a great advantage. Same thing with the STEM. And when you think about this, there are some of these schools that have guarantees 2 different ways, which is pretty neat.
Amy,
Thank you for mentioning the guarantee, because that was something
Yeah.
I was going to bring up. As far as Lytton goes, just looking at I didn't know if that for sure the 5.8 capacity was actually only 585 there. You have quite a few Laughlin parents now choosing Lytton. You have a huge percentage of Dan Mills who didn't always, used to choose Lytton. Now they are. I think last year was 69% of Dan Mills kids. So I think that will only increase. I know a lot of first, second grade parents are already we're going to Lytton. Do you have more room there, first of all? And for a lot of things that I've heard, I asked people out in the community, what are your concerns? And they didn't have a lot to say about pathways, except for they just said, we want for our whole family, once we choose and commit with our oldest child in kindergarten, we choose and commit to be guaranteed to go all the way. That was their concern, is the uncertainty is something they just don't want to deal with. They want to be able to go all the way. So, anyway.
So you're right that Lytton's enrollment is on the upward tick, correct? Dan Mills essentially is filled up through any kind of choice. There's a wait list at Dan Mills, so the demand is there. The other thing to say is that systemically across the district, our policy is to try to keep students together. So if out-of-zone students enroll in Dan Mills and then they apply for Lytton, they're already given first preference. So before we would ever take in, right now we're still able to take everybody applying for Lytton anyways, even the pathways or others. But what, so I just want to clarify that down the road when Lytton does their application demand exceeds capacity, the existing policy already outlays that out-of-zone students at Dan Mills and Inglewood are given first preference.
Can you change that policy?
Now, that's not a blanket guarantee as a program. And the reason for that is because that's getting into capital commitments. That's getting into, what's the capacity of the elementaries, and is there really the capacity there to serve those? Let's say that once Inglewood's enrollment comes back up, we have to be assured that we can serve the zone students, and we can't necessarily commit to capital improvements that aren't already done. And so we do, across the district, give preference there, but it isn't a blanket guarantee. Now, at a school like East, it's a non-zone school, and we know exactly the programmatic pathways coming in there, so we're assured to evaluate those carefully so that we don't overextend our commitments. And that's where pathways exist, is places like Meigs to Hume Fogg, Laughlin to East. If it was Warner to East, we very carefully evaluate those in that nature. So
my comeback to that would be to say, wait and see what happens if we locate Bailey at Stratford. You've got a 5-12 pathway there that will be very attractive, and I think that'll pull some of that pressure off Lytton as we go forward. It's a brand new building. Mm-hmm. We've got the Vanderbilt Science Program there, and I'm sure all of you know that we've got kids going from Bailey, and Julie can probably talk about this, Bailey and Lytton to Stratford now, 1 day a week.
Yes, the 7th graders go 1 day, the 8th graders go 1 day. It's our
Yeah.
top scholars. They go for a half day, or almost a full day, special science program that's integrated subject areas. But I'll tell you that even with that one program, we did have a lot of concern from parents about if their 7th graders and 8th graders would have contact with the high schoolers. Now it's 7th and 8th graders. I'm worried about the 5th grade parents
Yeah.
and how they're going to perceive that. So it'll have to be very carefully thought out.
Yeah, and planned and marketed, and Michael Steele can add to this conversation. I built 2 5 through 12 schools in Chattanooga before I left that are very successful. And when you've got space in a building, you can dedicate space. Michael and I just talked in the last week or so about the space that will be available, and there'll be a dedicated wing to a middle school there if we choose to go that way. We've got more capacity than we need, so we can separate kids as we need to.
If I could clarify one thing on the capacity at Lytton too. The capacity, yes, is showing it's 585. That's based on the program and the way the school's currently being used. There's obviously still an excess of capacity there, so it tends that we might not scrutinize that quite as carefully. As the demand picks up and as the leadership of the school, we work a lot more closer with the leadership to assure that it's used as absolutely effectively as it can. So I would not stand here tonight and say that it's not possible that Lytton could have more than 585. It very well might be able to serve more than 585 students as we start to approach that number. I can't commit that it would, but as we do approach capacity, that's when we start to say, hey, we could really reuse this, or this program could be used differently to get more students in.
And I want to point out that last meeting, all 3 groups, it was interesting that came away with something. We wanted to kind of experiment with the Bailey situation, come up with either a 7 through 12 at Stratford, a mini middle school inside of Stratford. So it came up in all 3 different groups, which was one of the few commonalities between us all.
Just this last week, I participated in a roundtable that was filled with Rockland parents. It was me and a bunch of Rockland. How that happened, I don't know. But and it was fascinating to me because it was immediately following the lottery, whatever, and these parents were overwhelmingly concerned with the amount of options. It was a little confusing to me, because to me, in my world, Englewood, Lytton, and Stratford, it's pretty clear. But because not all of them are coming at their zone school, or their concern was at middle school, they were scattering to the winds through every school in East Nashville, and then all of the academic magnets throughout the city became options for parents, and some of that was because they were concerned with what we've talked before, the consistency or between the grade levels, between the grade level breaks, that what these kids were, what these families were experiencing through the life at Lockland was not translating well into East Middle. And then they were choosing Lytton and every other middle school except Bailey. That was the one that nobody mentioned they had. There was one person that said on her street there are 9 different middle schools between the families on her street, and not one of them was Bailey, which says something in and of itself. But I don't know what to do with that information. I had never been in a room where people were so confused and concerned about the fact that there were a lot of options for middle school. And it was the confusion and the concern had a lot to do with people not buying into a K-12, a straight-through guaranteed or seemingly guaranteed K-12 pathway, which to me it seems like there is one, but...
Well, we've had more success in Inglewood, as you know. I mean,
Yeah.
we've had the buy-in at the Stratford tailgates, and there's
Right.
some sort of a connection being made. And I personally feel like in Lower East that hasn't happened as
Yeah.
much.
That's
I
what
think you're feeling
yeah.
the disconnect between those two, and obviously those are some of the things we're trying to figure out.
But it was, I mean, there were 8 of us at the table or thereabouts. No couples. It was all individual families represented, and every single one of them was really concerned and confused that when they leave Laughlin to choose a middle school, that their choices weren't clear.
So I understand that.
Okay.
And what, our approach to that is, I believe in choice. I believe in letting parents have choices for their children. And that's a fundamental in the pupil assignment process in Davidson County before I got here. And it's not my plan, but I believe in it. But I think the way I respond to that is we want to give you some guarantees. And what these pathways do is allow us, we've got the capacity in East Nashville to guarantee some K-12 pathways. And when Steve, you might want to come up, and Michael too, or come over here if you will. Y'all are on the wrong side of the cameras. But that's what we've been talking about. How do we build the quality pipeline K-12 all the way through? Come on up, Ron, if you will.
Got extra seats.
In all three of these high school pathways. And Steve, I stole from Chattanooga, and Steve ran probably the best Paideia school in the country, Chattanooga School for the Arts and Sciences, CSAS, K-12, and had another school that was a K-8 school that fed into it. And there was that K-12 guaranteed pipeline. What Michael and I have talked about is ways to really strengthen that STEM pipeline at Stratford, and I think the potential is here to build that.
Yeah, I think maybe it'd be good to hear from the principals, just a quick comment, and then the committee could maybe ask you guys questions. Obviously, we've got pretty big change at East and Stratford, maybe a little lesser at Maplewood. And love to hear y'all's thoughts and then just maybe some questions.
And we met after we had the last meeting. I called Ron before we even left here to talk about, just some alignment and what the opportunities were, and the SLCs are the academies that he has at Maplewood. And with that, we said, well, let's call everyone together and let's meet over the break. And we did as a cluster, all the principals did meet, and we all said the same thing. There needs to be some alignment within our cluster, because if you look at the map, even within the map, the elementaries going into the Stratford cluster, the proposal is STEM and then Paideia for East, but yet with the elementaries for the Maplewood cluster, there's still not on any alignment going up through the middle and high school pathway. And Ron can speak to this at Maplewood, one of his academies, he has health, he has, Ron, what do you have? You have
energy and power.
Energy and power. We talked about that one, and we talked about that with STEAM focus with that group, and how would that look, and how could we feed into that? But that was a natural feed. But that's a conversation piece for the principals, because the middle school, we could see how we could make that work, and it's already happening at the high school and with the academies and what's going on there. But it's how to get the elementary tier
aligned with either a STEM or a STEAM. So not basically choosing, but starting the conversation of it. So for us, our focus is to recruitment-wise, because recruitment has gone down at Maplewood, at the middle school feeders. We need something where a parent can say, well, I am in the Maplewood cluster, and we are this. I'm East, I'm Padea, I'm STEM, but what are we? And we need something.
Okay, so I'm just in my thoughts, I'm hearing that you have different academies within your high school, correct? Is there any way, or you tell me how you feel about it, that you could recreate those academies in the middle school on a smaller level? Maybe how you feel about making Jerry Baxter like full 5th and 6th and Graymar full 7th and 8th, where you have all these students going here, because what I'm seeing is a red and a yellow school that ultimately, if we could
not after May though, but go ahead. As
we change, and even that could be a strength that we, reconfigure these students and have stronger students there with some of the students who may be struggling, and recreate those high school academies so that they see those things happening from middle school to high school, and they're able to, if you were in the health academy in middle school, you can flow right into the health academy in high school. So then you will, I don't know a creative name for that type of, structure, but I'm wondering how you feel about that.
Well, I'm thinking it might be, if I was a parent, there might be a lot of movement for a kid to have to go, like you would feed into Tom Joy, your K4, then Jerry Baxter, and you have to move again to another school, 7th, 8th, and you move into Maplewood. And so that's a lot of movement, and parents need time to get to know the teachers and the administrator. And that.
Okay.
Can I say something about that? I think one of the ways you can do what you just talked about is when you have a K-12 pathway and you know the kids that are going to be coming to you, or at least are designed to come to you, then you can start doing some of those things with those schools, and you can start bringing those programs down and exposing those kids to those things, inviting them onto the campus, taking some of your top kids down to the schools. I think that's doable in any pathway. For us at East, the thing that's missing for us is the pathway. Our middle school, right now, we have 48 different elementary schools feeding into East Middle. You can't, my most active parents in my middle school come from right around the school. That makes total sense to me because I've got kids that come to East from Bellevue, from the South End, I've got them from Antioch, I've got them from Whites Creek, but what parent wants to get back in their car after spending a day at work and turn around and drive right back to a school? It doesn't work that way. And so when you have one of the things I'm really excited about with this is when you know who your feeder schools are and you know who's coming to you, and you still got room for some of those kids from outlying areas, not shutting them off, but the possibilities of doing some of the things you just mentioned about taking kids down into those elementary schools and really showing them that pathway, that's the most powerful thing about this, in my opinion.
See, I would agree that, and from what I've heard from other parents, is that it's not the programming that's really a thing. Like, I'm not super interested in STEM, but because we have relationships with Lytton and then Stratford down. I'm bringing my first grader to Stratford football games. It's the relationships. Tracy Bruno's bringing teachers over to Danville's. Kids from Lytton are tutoring kids at Inglewood. It's the relationship that you have, down the pathway, not as much as the program.
Well, it's the relationship and the quality of the education. So if the elementary school, whatever you call it, needs to be good. And I think, especially the elementary school level, little kids don't know what they want to be. It's science, but I guess it may work at the STEM at the elementary level, but are they coming to the middle school on grade level? Are they ready to do that? And the middle school level, they change careers so often too. I think pigeonholing a kid in 5th or 6th grade could be problematic. I just think that they feel comfortable with knowing that there are other options out there ready for them when they go to high school, and that middle school experience, that's I think we're losing kids the most. that 5 through 8 grade levels. I think it needs to be, you want the strong culture, like doing a 5, 6, 7, 8, I think would ruin culture. I think if you had that, but I think if they feel part of the school and they're getting what they need academically, so when they go to high school, they have the skills that they need to whatever career they can choose, they're qualified to do it.
Let me speak specifically to the East Pathway a little bit too. There is a movement within Lockland parents to strengthen that pathway. There is a group called Parents for the East Pathway that is pretty active, and there are a lot of people working together with that. And I've noticed there has been a strengthening of the relationship, the same kind of things you're talking about. We just had the Lockland talent show kind of thing. It had a different name though. It was phenomenal.
Lockland Live.
Lockland Live. It was at East, and we've been using the East facilities more and more. So I also think I'm also excited about strengthening and expanding that pathway. One thing that kind of gets to what was discussed earlier with the being able to commit to the pathway though, and was in the notes from the last time. In West Nashville right now, we have parents who are trying to keep the kids together going from Sylvan Park and Aiken to West. And I get the capital expense that we were talking about earlier in regards to that. Over here, being that Lockland is an all-choice school, and we have so many all-choice schools in general, being able to commit to the pathway is, for your family, is difficult when you age out of the sibling preference. So I think one way to keep the pathways strong is to consider sibling preference a pathway preference and not an individual school preference. Because and that would encourage the strengthening of going from Lockland or Warner to East. If your kid's at East, they can still go to Lockland or Warner. And so being able to consider that parents are committing to that pathway early on, I think will raise the parent involvement K-12 all the way through. So I'd love to see that as part of this.
I have a really hard time going back to Lockland parents as the example for East Nashville. It's a very small subset that is not reflective of the majority of families. I think that the pathway discussion, the guarantee, security, when we are talking about families where there is over 50% mobility, pathways are not the priority for a large number of families. Quality schools is the key. And I understand that this is a discussion about pathways. We've talked about quality, but I cannot look at them in isolation. The thing that when I look at this, my desire is to maximize quality and maximize equity. It doesn't look like we're talking about a lot of changes in the Maplewood cluster. I think that more changes would be beneficial. If we're talking about East is, of the 3 high schools in our zone, has the highest performance. It's mentioned, expanding even more, but if we're talking about pathways, I would say giving an option to families of a lower SES than the Warner district, for instance, in Schwab or Caldwell, that opens up opportunity. So I just challenge us to really look through these choices as through the lens of equity. And that might require kind of trying to take another's perspective.
I think they work together and they can't happen in a vacuum. Like there can't be just, I think that as you increase, help the relationships and build a pathway, then that brings up the quality. But also as far as neighborhoods in East Nashville, you can have a Section 8 home next to a $500,000 home. The neighborhoods are just
mixed development.
Yes, so it's far as this neighborhood, this neighborhood, this neighborhood. So I think they don't need to happen in a vacuum. They need to happen together.
I understand what you're saying, and I think one advantage is having the capacity, but I think we also have to pay attention to that. And when we get ready to talk about transportation can make a big difference in providing that equal opportunity. There are other things that we can do too, and Chris and I, where's Chris? Over there. We haven't talked about this, but you can also identify GPZ, a priority zone, and you could expand that priority zone, and we're not locked into a specific set of schools to be the K-12 pathway. There's a delicate balance here, though. I know when I was first thinking about this, I was thinking about either Glenn or Caldwell, but what happens when you take that comes out of the Maplewood cluster, and so we're robbing Peter to pay Paul there, and so I think what we have to really do is look at the equity within the choice program, and for all of those people, to be able to guarantee the K-12 pipeline is important. We still haven't finished something that I think is important, and that's to study mobility in the 3 clusters, and to see how much of the mobility is contained within those 3 clusters. Because what I'd love to do is cut the mobility in half. If we could develop a transportation system so that if you moved anywhere in the Maplewood cluster or the Stratford cluster or in the East Pipeline, if you were in that, you could stay if you wanted to, and we could provide transportation. That'd be a huge gain for us, I think.
I'd be interested to see those numbers. A lot may be moving to Madison or Antioch, and so it's data that I guess we need to see. It'd have to be worth it, transportation, like paying the cost of Glen to, the Stratford area, for example, like you kind of get into a lot of extra potential costs. Yeah.
So to piggyback a little bit on Catherine's point, I mean, you look at how do we get equitable access to quality schools, right? We can build quality schools, and that's what we're going to try to do with the turnaround stuff, and we have other options. We have KIPP, and we have, the other schools that we are building out quality. But, I look on this, and this is a third rail, I'm sure, but I look on this map, and I don't see Meg's Middle on here anywhere. And I know this has come up a little bit, and I can hear the shrieks from all around Nashville as I bring this up, but it's an East Nashville school, and it is a quality East Nashville school. That is a good school right now, right here, that we have. I think there still needs to be a discussion of, you could do a socioeconomic status set aside of X number of seats at Meg's for East Nashville students just coming from, Schwab and Kirkpatrick and Inglewood, and pick a couple of schools and do a set aside and say, we are going to make sure those kids have an equitable choice. They have a shot to get in a really good school, and they're not crowded out by everyone else. I mean, I think it's at least worth discussing. I mean, we see East. That's in green. Meg's is definitely in green. I'm going to draw a box on here and write Meg's.
And our goal is to make them all green, obviously.
Absolutely.
That's what we're doing.
But
And I think that as far as quality, yes, we can all say it's test scores, but a lot of parents, they just want the school that's closest to them, where their friends go, and they might not want a very test. I mean, they want different environments. Some people want more structure. Some people want mostly arts and crafts and lots of recess. So it's,
I think that goes back to the relationship thing, and I think that's key, is that the relationships that people are building in elementary school
or relationships that they want to carry them through high school. And that's what I hear when I talk, and I'm watching the Facebook feeds and such too, and listening to the questions and such. And so I know that, first I think that simplicity is key, and I think that people being allowed to build those relationships and sustain those relationships all the way through is important. And I've heard the talk about a STEM school or this school or that school, and I think that those are important to have those programs. But I've also heard talk of people asking about adding like an IB program or something, some sort of liberal arts education that would help retain people and keep people from going. So in a sense, we've got the school district saying you can go anywhere you want, and we're going to shoot you here and here and here and here, and then you have neighborhoods saying we kind of want to keep this easy. So there may be a little back and forth and a little, I don't want to say contention, but kind of a little butting, because we're kind of coming at it from different angles. So I know that there's a middle ground somewhere. But I've heard parents already talk about, who go to Stratford, who are concerned that maybe their middle school kid don't have an interest in science or technology. And part of that is marketing and letting people know that, first, STEM covers a lot of ground, and it doesn't mean you're going to be a NASA engineer or that you have to go, you don't have to do this. But I think people believe that they do. They believe that if I go to this school, I'm going to have to be a scientist or a doctor, or if I go to this school, I've got to do this. So they need to know that just because a school has a label or it has a focused program, that's not all that's available at that school, and maybe creating some other options to let people, to bring people in so that they feel comfortable there.
No, that's a college prep school is what you're saying. Like it's a college preparatory school. Like we're trying to get your kids through the schools and onto college.
Yeah, and I wonder too about marketing. What kind of marketing budget do we actually have? I get stuff all the time. So I know that there are schools out there that have marketing budgets and that are able to push stuff through the mail and everywhere else, but door knocking is not going to do it. I mean, that's nice and it's warm and fuzzy, but it only works in some areas, and I just don't see rounding people up a couple of times a year to go knock on doors to say, hey, come to our school, as a way to sell our school. So we have to figure out some sort of strategic marketing plan with limited budget, it sounds like from folks that I'm talking to. Or when we go to Metro or to the government and say, hey, this is our budget, but look, we need some money for marketing. If the schools are going to be competing against each other, then we need some marketing bucks. And am I off track?
So I spend a lot of money on marketing in my business, and it's really hard to attract young people, particularly young families. They don't look at media, so it's really hard to spend money on marketing. But what I'm looking at right here is, let's look at Chadwell and Caldwell, two green schools going to Graymar, and their current enrollment is over 600 students, and yet you have 408 going to Graymar. And I think we can safely make the assumption that they're going to the charter middle schools that have opened up in East Nashville,
or the magnets,
or the magnets or meds.
Yeah.
But they're going somewhere else, and that charter enrollment has been the big change, not magnet enrollment in the past few years. And how are they doing it? I mean, that is door knocking, right? And that goes back to that relationship part that you're talking about. Having that relationship deeper down into the school. Because I have to assume, I mean, maybe I don't have to, but I wonder, is there some how do we get from higher enrollment green to lower enrollment yellow? And I don't know.
Part of that's just that elementary schools have an extra grade, and so the math doesn't work out so that 600 go into 400.
But there's still an attrition there.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't want to discount the door knocking. I think that there's something to be said. Mike Steele took the teachers out last year, and they fanned through the neighborhood, and we had people talking, saying, "Hey, the principal from Stratford came to our house," or people came, and they like that. They like knowing that their school is engaging them, because they're going to in turn engage that school. I'm not saying that we need to cut that out. I'm saying that from the conversations that I've had and the folks that I've talked to, there is not really a marketing budget, and there needs to be some sort of marketing. And I think that a big part of your marketing is happening in natural relationships that develop.
Yeah, it works. I think when school's good, parents talk. I think that's the main thing. They know school's good because their friends and their neighbors go there and it works. I think that's the marketing is great. Like, that's Dr. Word is awesome with that. We're back and forth on Twitter all the time. Like that helps the school. But I think parents are making decisions based on what they know is happening in the building. So the marketing just kind of
or some kind of use old history. Like Bailey, it's a lot of people who bring up things that happened in the early 90s. And it's like, what? That's not currently going on now. And also within East Nashville, we do have a lot of bigger families. And so programming is still kind of important, especially if you have older siblings who are talking about what they're doing. You will have younger ones looking at, oh, I want to do robotics, or I want to do this. But when they mention a school that has a reputation like Bailey, then the parents are getting together and talking about old history and not stepping foot into the school and seeing what is happening.
That's where the marketing comes in.
Yeah, so you still kind of need that marketing. And switching gears, because I have kids at just about every school in Metro, I'm putting on my Laughlin hat as a Laughlin parent. A lot of that too with choosing Lytton is not about the programming, it's because of a wraparound service. And I know some parents, and I'm one of the ones, because I had a child at East who she had an IEP at her elementary school, but when she came over to East, she was kind of put on a waiting list of having that service continue, and it hindered her. And there's still that talk about that. And so I was just wondering, has that improved? Because sometimes parents still take on their grievance of what they experienced years ago, but have not stepped in. And so when someone says, oh, well, we have that at this school, that's when they choose that school, and it's not based primarily on that. And I just know with my fourth grader, when we had a round table discussion about it, that was one of the biggest concerns, which I mentioned, go to the school. You have to actually go into that school and see it. And let's not discredit our students, because our children know a lot more than we actually do, and so they actually do some research on their own, and it's not because Susie or Johnny is going to the school I want to go. It's something that's attracting that child as well, because if you will speak to my son, he will tell you that he's going to Lytton, but then in the next sense, you may talk to him like next month and he's like, well, I wish robotics was at East and I would be there. So it's kind of like, you do have to pay attention to that. But I'm just curious, has that improved? Because there were about 20 parents that were at that discussion for Laughlin who were concerned, like they would choose East and continue that pathway, but they want to make sure that what they're receiving at Laughlin is still going to be there at East.
Yeah, as far as I know, we're servicing every student that's on an IEP. We have all of our IEPs up to date, and we welcome students with disabilities. We haven't had anybody say anything like that, so that's kind of a surprise. So. Okay.
Let me say, I like the conversation about Lytton, and I'm going to tell you why. Because a few years ago, Lytton was spoken of as Jerry Baxter is spoken of now, and it was read. And what I think changed Lytton, as Dr. Richard said time again, is that there's a strong principal there that is listening and that is putting instruction prior and over everything in student first, and so you're getting that. So it's funny how the conversation over time changes. So what we have said before at this table is that how do we make sure that we're having quality instruction in our schools? And that's what has happened. So I'm enjoying the conversation. I keep hearing bounce back and forth about Lytton, because Lytton was once read.
It sure was. And people would never.
And so it was repurposed. It was changed. And that, what we're talking about is a potential for Bailey moving to a Stratford 5 through 12 is a similar event. I absolutely know what you're talking about, there's baggage from past reputation. And I know what these teachers are doing there, and I see good things happening there, but I don't know that, how do you overcome that? And one way to do that is to look at this 5 through 12 approach, and a building that'll make your eyes get big when it's finished.
Are you talking about overcoming the perception, the past perception? I think that that's something that we deal with constantly, and I think that a big piece of Litton's puzzle was absolutely the change in leadership there and what happened. I think also was, at Dan Mills, my frame of reference, we had parents at the playground talking, and where are you going to go? Well, we're going to Litton, and that was, 2009 was when Litton was going to close, and people were like, are you sure? Well, and the conversation was, if enough of us band together and go over there, then it's going to happen. It's going to take some time, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. But on that same note, I was watching Facebook last week, and there's been a couple of conversations in the East Nashville group, and somebody said, my kid is zoned for Stratford, and we're thinking about something else. What do you think? That was pretty much the question. There were about 50 or 60 responses, and this wouldn't have happened 3-5 years ago, but out of those 50 or 60 responses, 90% of them was, you need to go to Stratford. You need to go see Stratford and see what's happening at Stratford. So I think the word of mouth and the people talking is very important. And the only comments on there that were, no, don't do Stratford was people who were obviously speaking from a perspective 10 years ago, saying, no, you don't want to go Stratford. I mean, go as far away from Stratford. But it was those people, and you could peg them. You could peg them because everybody else was saying, go into the school. Just go into the school. And I've heard that more in the last year than I've heard in the entire time we've been in our education career. Go visit the school. Go visit
do we
the
feel
school.
like that, that a big part of the change, and I'd love to hear from Mr. Steele about doing this, is, repurposing the Bailey to be a smaller middle school inside of Stratford. I'd love to get your comments on that.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, that I've never seen a more dedicated group of teachers and principals that I have in Bailey to try to turn that school around. I can't put my finger on what's not happening or where. It's certainly not from a lack of effort. So we're excited about the possibility of doing that. We feel like we can embrace 5th graders through 8th graders, embrace them with the love and the relationship building that we've done with our high school kids. I've got a little bit different approach. I mean, everybody's always about instruction, and strong instruction is certainly important, but we don't look at student achievement as like the #1 priority. We look at relationship and character building that translates into student achievement as the #1 priority. So we want to build relationships with parents and students and kids, and it's a blessing to go to work every day when most of your student body loves you, even the ones you have to discipline, and they love their teachers and vice versa. So we're excited about the opportunity. Whoever designed Stratford was really on something back in the day, but now it looks like if this is going to happen, there is a dedicated wing for a middle school with a bottom floor for 5th and 6th grade, which would really isolate them, and then 7th and 8th grade, which is being successful now in the day of discovery with Litton and Bailey coming over now. That's a huge success already, and the kids already love it. And then they would just pop up upstairs for their science and then come back down. So there would be a little mixing, not with the 5th and 6th graders coming to PE, and then we'd have obviously a dedicated lunch period that they would not interact in the hallways with the upperclassmen. Of course, there's going to be some logistical things we'd have to work a lot of things out. But obviously, we'd have more staff because we'd have more students and we'd have more security. So we would be able to dedicate that wing and really, I say isolate, for lack of a better word, but I say isolate that middle school so it is a dedicated middle school within the school. But also, we want them to feel part of the STEM theme, and we also want them to feel part of the family. So we would be very methodical in how we would bring them along to be part of the family and part of the community. As you mentioned earlier, we're having up to 200 people at tailgaters. Most of those are elementary parents coming to high school tailgating because they're committed, because Stratford is now a community school. And I say this all the time, and I hope you haven't heard me say it before. I hope it's not a broken record, but my daughter graduated from there last year. She's doing wonderful at UT, and my son graduated 2 years ago. He's doing fantastic at work and in college. I don't know of a better testimony than that, the fact that we don't see we're hearing so much less than, hey, what Stratford used to be, because now we've been there 5 years in the turnaround. So now it's actually getting a lot better, and we're really excited about how far we've come academically, emotionally, and behaviorally. We're very excited about where we were and where we are now. And we would embrace this 100% with a very caring staff. There's always going to be parents, including me being one of them, probably, all of you probably being one of them, if your fifth grader was going to go into a high school setting. Wow. But then again, you're going to have some that say, absolutely love it, and if you can assure me of this, then I'm on board 100%. And I think that we can do a really good job. We've done a great job of building relationships with our community. And I think when the renovations are done, we're getting a brand new track, as you and I have been fighting for years now, Anthony. That's going to excite a lot of people, but the community is strong. Never seen a stronger community, and we embrace the idea, and just look forward to your suggestions and decisions for us to move forward.
I have some questions related to that, being represented from Bailey. So I understand that if Bailey goes there, our test scores will, we change our name, we're part of you all. Would our test scores be then averaged with you? Would it be a Stratford? Yes?
So here's the example.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you look at test scores, East Middle and East Higher together as one school. The state considers us one school under one number.
All right. And then would you have a separate principal for that middle school? Would it be like really its own?
We can do it. We can do it a couple of different ways. We could set a school down inside and have that distinct. But the way I would prefer to look at it is an administrative team. Where you've got a whole team of administrators who come together to work in the school. Steve's got how many assistant principals?
2 in the high school and 1 in the middle school.
Middle school principal and an assistant at the middle school level, and 2 assistants at the high school level. And so the administrative structure and the way you develop the grade thing and everything's something that we would work out so that it would work best for the kids in the school.
I have a personal opinion about that, but I think that obviously there's going to be an administrator or a group of administrators over the middle school, but I still think that there should be one executive principal for the entire school. That's what has worked. I'm not saying it just because of me, but the research is extremely clear about this point, that the principal is the key figure in the success of any school. Also, I'll just throw this out, that the research is also very clear that the transition between 8th grade and 9th grade drastically reduces a young person's ability to make that transfer, and they drop immediately academically and socially and emotionally. So this being a 5 through 12 would really be great for the transition part of it. But I would request through my boss that there would be one executive principal with oversight over the entire thing, and then to plan who's going to actually take that middle school to the next level. Because there's certainly some vision that I would have as the principal for wanting to move scores quickly in the middle school.
So we're set up to do that. Steve's an executive lead principal, but we have he's essentially a middle school building principal, and has a degree of autonomy there. You're not having to run the middle school. You have somebody doing that. But there's a possibility for the networks are important, and having leads are important. But we're premature. It's too early to say that. We don't have the details worked out. Let me say this: when we talk about these pathways, we're not talking about next year. We're talking about 16, and that's Chris. You might want to speak to that. When we change grade configurations or pathways or things like that, we are very deliberate. We take our time. What I would want to do before I leave is get the school board to approve this. And I think that's where you folks can really weigh in. But it doesn't take. But it's not implemented until year after next, until the 16th school year.
I could just say a piece about that. I'm just grabbing the mic here. But so
So what we typically like to do is have the school board approve a plan such as this a year in advance, so that if it was approved before Dr. Register was to leave, we would all know what to expect, have a year to plan, have the time to communicate with families. That's not to say that, however, whatever the ultimate plan that's approved, it's not to say that there is no possibility of something not being implemented in 15-16. We don't currently have anything up here for a K-4 school, but certainly there's a good possibility that if an elementary was going to be K-5, we would not necessarily turn away fourth grade families that are ultimately wanting to stay at that elementary the next year. That would be an easier transition. So there's a potential for pieces that could get implemented in advance, but for the most part, we're looking for 16-17 as an implementation with the hopes of a school board approving it sometime later this spring.
I have one more question about Bailey. So if we were to be part of, your school, would we be able to keep pieces of our Bailey identity, or would it be really a brand new school with just the same students?
I think that's a conversation that we would have as a brand new faculty. It'd be our school, and it's a brand new faculty. What I'm seeing now, which is so fantastic, is my content leads are leading their content areas. They are making decisions and choices. It's almost a teacher-led school, with certain organizational dynamics that are in place. I'm a strong believer that there's a boss, and that boss is the boss for a reason, but that boss, if he's a good leader or she's a good leader, she's going to listen to everybody else and make choices that are beneficial to everybody in the school, keeping harmony, but also keeping accountability at a certain level. That's the thing that has kept Stratford doing the trajectory going well at Stratford, is the accountability piece along with the relationship building piece. So I would want to have, I would not for this tonight, but I would throw the question out there in a meeting with the new faculty is, do we want to maintain a separate identity? Why not have a one identity? Why not go with this vision? And of course, how great would it be to have not only that big faculty together now, but to have parents like John and other parents who are going to be sending their kids to Stratford at 90% to be part of that discussion and say, here's our new identity and here's where we're going with this. Stratford High School is going to be the high school to go to in the next 5 years. When that community and those kids become teenagers, and right now there's not a lot of them because the enrollments has dropped, but when those people start building those houses and moving into those houses with young children and they become teenagers, that school is going to be the place to go to school. And now if they're going to be fifth graders, you're going to see a lot going on at the school. And John, to your point earlier, I don't see any reason why we should be limited for parents at one of the liberal arts or some IB programs. I don't see any reason why we would have to be limited to that. The whole idea, the whole concept is that students get to choose what they want to study. So I'm 100% open to whatever we could do to alleviate any of those kind of fears. I mean, and STEM has a lot going for it.
You're going to be one of the schools to go to, right, Ron?
And you keep saying your new faculty, so is that implying that your new, if Bailey went there, that, it's your school, it'd be a Stratford school, and so you would be in charge of hiring, and so there wouldn't necessarily be the Bailey staff moving over there?
I hope the Bailey staff, I'd love the Bailey staff to move over there. But in all honesty, Julie, there's going to have to be an understanding that there is a principal of the school, and we're premature, but you asked the question, so I'll answer. My leadership style, my background that I've always been successful with, no matter what I've done in my life, there'd have to be understanding that I'm the principal of the school, and my vision is a vision that I want everybody to share, and I'll do whatever I have to do to get them to share that vision. I've got a 90% retention rate amongst my current teachers. So I think that says a lot. However, I have a little bit of a different leadership style than Christian does, and I have a little bit of a different philosophy of what Christian does. My first implementation was, I want to know the literacy rate of every fifth grader through eighth grader, and we're going to focus on literacy until they are on grade level, ready to move into the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. So I know that you guys focus on literacy as well, but perhaps we come together and we figure out a way to do it that's going to be beneficial. Our literacy scores have gone way up, almost flip-flop from the time that I got to Stratford, where there were 75% of the students that were below at the fifth grade reading level in high school. That has flipped now. We've got over 80% of our kids almost right there at grade level, and a lot of our kids are at post-high school level. So, I don't think it has to be anything like that. I think it could be something that's exciting. And I know that Bailey's worked really hard and I know that it would be somewhat disappointing. It would feel like a defeat, but I don't see it that way. I see nothing but a bunch of dedicated educators who are bound and determined to have those children learn, and I know you have a difficult job over there. I don't see it that way. I see it as a collaboration amongst more educators now to make a really great school.
Well said.
Just hearing you speak, that kind of reassured me on my doubts. I did share what we have been discussing in here. So hearing you out have really lessened my doubts. But then I have my charge to us who have mentioned moving Bailey into Stratford. Since this is our time to discuss and we keep saying that parents need to come into the school or you need to check out the school, what better example would that be than us who have mentioned to change it and to see what's going on? Because it's easy to say, hey, Lytton is doing wonderful. Let's go ahead and move Bailey, because I don't want Bailey to be forgotten. And I'm not fearful of change of any means, or I wouldn't be here, because this is totally out of my comfort zone. But I'm just like, we need that buy-in, because the missing puzzle piece to Bailey is the community. And so that would look nice of us being an East Nashville Advisory Committee to go inside of Bailey and see what's happening and then come back and discuss and make those changes, or so to speak, or try to have that in progress to change. Just my charge.
Right. Well, yeah, and we want to hear from you. I mean, it was important to me to hear from the two of you of, are you open to this? What are your thoughts? You guys are clearly working very hard. I know Dr. Coverstone, I know we've put a lot of effort into that school. And so, there's some value of keeping what is growing and working well. And if we end up moving it, and that is the decision we make, but also with the whole marketing discussion, a fresh start as well. So there's some value there too. So it's just tough to chew on.
Plenty of time to look at what's happening there. You've got the rest of this year, and what I'd say is for Bailey is create a cohort of teachers that are highly successful, and people will be begging for that cohort of teachers to go. And so see what happens this year, see how successful they are. They've got some good things going on. Let's look at what happens this year. And we're talking about a year and a half away. And I don't see, this won't be cast in stone one way or the other when this decision's made. A lot of those teachers might be gone. They might choose to go other places. If you keep a cohort together and they're highly effective, that's a great advantage, and y'all to do that. And so we play that. We see where it goes. Ron's not said much, but I'm going to say this: he's growing his enrollment, and things are going well at Maplewood. And what I want to say is that the key to Maplewood right now is what happens at Jerry Baxter and at Graymar. And there's a lot of potential there. Antoinette Williams was principal at Graymar and got into the Grain. And now she's running the middle schools. And Miriam, and I think Graymar's still doing very well. And now we've got an opportunity to bring Jerry Baxter along. You put two strong middle schools there, and watch Maplewood take on. Because I think there's some really good things going on at Maplewood.
So I'd like to speak to that just for a moment. First off, thanks for having me tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks, Chief, for inviting me out. Maplewood High School and Stratford High School are very similar in demographic. And so what separates Maplewood High School and Stratford High School is a street called Gallatin Road. And so on the upper end of Gallatin Road, on the Stratford side, you have trendy businesses and shops moving in, and the neighborhood is completely changing. The neighborhood is changing on our end also. However, due to issues in poverty, et cetera, everything is changing. Businesses are going away, and it's totally different. Okay, and here's my concern, and I want to be respectful here. On the Stratford end time, we talk about equity. On the Stratford end, we're seeing them have this $20 million plus renovation. Okay, and I think it was needed. Respectfully, I'm saying that. And also, I think, 4 years ago, they got the Magnet grant, okay, which helped them brand their cluster, okay? None of these things are happening in the Maplewood cluster. So when we talk about equity, if we're going to rebrand the Maplewood cluster, we're going to need the dollars to do it. And so we need the community to stand behind this, and we need the school board to stand behind it so that we can get the dollars that we need to rebrand the Maplewood cluster. We're all about that. But despite the odds, Maplewood High School has been successful. Despite being the highest poverty high school in this city, you know, we had the highest increase in gains in the city, okay, amongst high schools. Despite the odds, $3.3 million in scholarships. Despite the adversity, we rank third amongst zoned high schools in graduation rates. Top 3. Graduation rate is 82.4%. About 84% of our kids go to college on average. We have a critical mass of about 16 to 18% that will opt to go into the military or right into the workforce. And so despite the obstacles, we have been very successful. We're working very hard. We're working with our feeder schools. And we're very interested in rebranding the Maplewood cluster, but there has not been equity there. I'm just gonna be honest. I'm gonna call it like I said, there has not been equity. When two schools are just separated by one street and everything is happening on this side of Gallatin Road and nothing on this side of Gallatin Road, you don't have equity. And so when there's not equity, you know, how can we level the playing field for these two high schools? Okay, how can we do that? You made an interesting point. You know, in 5 years, Stratford will be a sight to see. Okay, I'm going to compete with you by sheer work ethic. Okay, but I'm not going to have a multi-million-dollar renovation. Okay, and so the kids that get the opportunity to go to Stratford will get a new building and all those things. But what will the kids at Maplewood High School have? Okay, so there has been an issue in equity that's been going on for a long time. We've got to address it. We've got to get the elephant out of the room. It is what it is. And so let's look at kind of leveling the playing field some. Sure, let's rebrand the Maplewood High School cluster. I would love to maybe look at a project-based learning demonstration site for our cluster where we could be a project-based learning cluster. Or look at, now that Google is here, you know, maybe we could partner with Google and look at some type of technology focus. You know, I am all interested in that, but I'm saying we have to have a sense of equity. We have to address it. And I'm going to say this also. When we talk about choice in this community, choice comes down to race. I believe that there are some parents that would choose not to come to a school like Maplewood, one, because of past reputation, and then number 2, because they fear their kids being around a certain type of kid. They have preconceived notions about a certain type of kid, and they don't want their kids there, so they will opt to go somewhere else. And so those are things we're working really hard to change also. So let's have the conversation. Let's talk about equity. Let's talk about how we can equitably, you know, make all the schools in East Nashville great, not just 2 high schools in East Nashville great. And I say that respectfully with my colleagues here, and they know I'll wrestle with them. So,
more to support Maplewood. Like, I have a dream someday of, like, having a huge, like, Maplewood-Stratford rivalry, you know?
It
like,
is.
old school.
It's
already there. Well, I mean, but like
it's
football, you know, and we want
new people
to
need to
encourage that.
Well,
it's a very friendly rivalry.
We're big rivals, and Ron and I talk a lot about getting our kids together in peace, because sometimes the kids take it too far and there's silliness happening. That's high school stuff, but from our schools, silliness can be serious. We talk all the time about having the kids together and having a community, and we get them together all the time. We bring them together and talk to them after games when we're there. You know, Steve too. I mean, but it's just what a lot of people don't realize is how much we're working for that kind of camaraderie amongst all of our students, that kind of love and respect for all of our students. And this is something that hasn't been going on. I've only been here 5 years, and I've only seen this community change. The change has been remarkable, but when I first got here, it wasn't all that. And I was sent to do a job, and so that's kind of what I started off doing, you know. But it wasn't all that, and neither was Maplewood. And now we've got people coming from all over the city to want to go to our schools for various reasons. From all different ethnicities. Our ethnicities are changing every day. And so, you know, Steve's got them coming from all over the city anyways, but we're starting to see students come from all the cities. We just got some projections from our school choice, and Stratford, the 9th and 10th grade, up 60 students in each from various other middle schools. And that was a part of marketing, John. Also marketing, just so you know, before you and I ever really got to know each other, there was a lot of marketing going on. We we did spend a lot of money on marketing with the grant money that we had, and and now we have almost a full-time publicist over here that does a great job that helps us market. So we need more. There's no doubt that we need more, but we actually did spend a lot of money on mail-outs and brochures and those kind of things. And just now we're about to have a billboard, Stratford billboard. I don't know how long we're going to be able to maintain it, but we've tried pretty much everything. So to Jackson's point, it's hard. It's
Which
hard.
side of Gallatin Road is the board?
Well,
It's going to be their side.
Well, I think some consideration has to be given to the perspective of time frames too. To some, when you're talking about certain things, 5 years is a short amount of time. When you're talking about other things, it's a long time.
Yeah.
I think we've all heard the rumbles from the Maplewood cluster. I think that is. I think that as East Nashville changes, that rumble has begun at Maplewood. It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook. I see these folks popping on and comments being made, and so I see that stuff happening the same way that it happened with Stratford 5 years ago. We were kindergarten 5 years ago, and there was no way, when we went into kindergarten, that Stratford wasn't going to happen. Lytton wasn't going to happen. It was a year in or so before people finally started committing to that, but it only takes a small group. And once that rumble begins, then you get that small click, then it starts to trickle. And 5 years may sound like a long time, but that's what it's taken. That's what it's taken. And I know we've got scores and achievements, and we've got to make this mark, and there's money involved, and I understand that. It just takes time to build relationships and for things to change, and I see it coming, all over East Nashville.
I just want to say this. Ron came to my school last year at a basketball game. He just said, "I want to just compliment what you've done is remarkable. The relationship building." Well, then I saw that just last week, and when I went to his school for a basketball game, the kids will come up to him and say, "Hey, Doctor, what? Hey, Doctor, what? Hey, Doctor." Just hugs and high fives and all that kind of stuff. That's what it's all about. That's really what we should be measuring. Don't get me started, Anthony, but but the relationships that we build through the community members like you guys and through what we're trying to do at these schools is phenomenal. But East needs renovations too. Maplewood needs renovations. I just got lucky, I guess. I've got a great councilman that
we need to not forget the Maplewood cluster, and it's well taken. We got to wrap up just because we're well over time. We'll meet again on the 4th. We want you to chew on the pathways stuff, obviously. We'll readdress it again a little bit next meeting, as you're able to digest more. But, based on our feedback, this is kind of an initial suggestion. So take this with you. We're also going to have a guest speaker on the 4th to talk about kind of communities, how we can bring communities in schools better. So that's sort of another discussion. So.
What's transportation? We know yet?
We'll probably have to touch on that in the last one, and push towards recommendations.
Probably.
Yeah, or we could, we might talk about what our agenda is going to be for the next one.
Okay.
Go over that a little bit. So.
Is the next meeting on the 4th?
We're meeting on the 4th, 5:30.
Is that the night we're supposed to have the big cookout? Chili dinner with, okay, so I think we need to change it because we're meeting our new football coach.
Okay.
We've got priorities here.
I could propose that you could have a meeting in our library and come down to some chili and go back up if you want to do that.
Might be done with that. Okay, well, thank you for mentioning that, John. We'll circle up with Hank about it. So, watch your email for announcements.